Underworld that has been been discussed for the past 2 years. Trevor Campbell and Dustin Deal are writers for the Nerdvana, which is the nerd blog for the East Valley Tribune. They will be discussing what we already know about the show and what we hope to see. So I'm going to hand the panel over to them and see what they got.
All right, hello everyone. All right, so first off, we're not official representatives of Lucasfilm or anything like that, so if you're looking for any official statements, you're not going to get it.
I'm not this guy.
I'm done. First off, too, kind of funny, this week actually we found out that Underworld is not even the working title anymore. Rick McCullum, the producer, he was doing an interview with IGN, and he kind of took back that statement which he had given a couple weeks before. So already this panel is out of date. But we'll stick with it because I think it's a good descriptor for what's been said so far about the show. So this is us. If you have any questions or want to tweet about the panel, those are our Twitter handles up there, and also you can use the hashtag SWUnderworld. And we'll be compiling some of the comments that are tweeted during the panel, and then we're going to write a blog post up for Nerdvana after the con is over, incorporating some of your guys' thoughts and some of the discussions that we have hopefully at the end of the panel. So if you want to have your voice heard on the Nerdvana blog, go ahead and tweet us or talk to us after, and we'll make sure to get you included in that. So Underworld, Star Wars the live-action TV show, it's been discussed since 2005, actually. It was first announced at Celebration 3. This was a poster that showed up. This was kind of the first official announcement that it was even in the works. Clearly 2011 it didn't happen, because we're now in 2012, and we don't even have any production dates yet. But this was kind of the first visual, so clearly Boba Fett is going to be somehow involved. So here's just a few quotes that have been talked about, some of the major key players. We've got George Lucas and some Steve Sansweet, and also some from Rick McCullum, the producer. So this is just kind of to give us an idea of what they've been saying. So in Lucas's mind, it's very action heavy, but it's also very talky. Less of the 30s action adventure and more of the 40s kind of film noir style. And he's also said, you know, we'll kind of be hearing about some of the major characters in the background, but we're not going to really see many of them. It's not really about them. You know, it's going to be more about kind of the lowly man, the stormtrooper, the spy, the gangster. No Jedi. A.C. Crispin wrote the Han Solo trilogy and really wanted to also write a book about Leia during the dark times, but she was told by Lucasfilm that was hands-off because they were considering it for the television show. So she said this in an interview on the Star Wars forum. Granted, these quotes have been pulled from years and years and years of interviews, so these are also subject to change. Rick McCullum, the producer, definitely been talking a lot about it recently in some interviews, and the theme seems to be that it's going to be really dark, really gritty, kind of like Star Wars Soprano style. And he mentions here like Wall Street, so kind of the seedy side. And then Steve Sansweet, the underbelly of Star Wars. He was the director of fan interactions for a long time at Lucasfilm. So what do we actually know? There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of rumors, so what do we actually know right now? Well, it was announced at C3 in 05. It is going to be live action. They want to do about 100 to 400 hour-long episodes, depending upon how successful it is. They are going to be feature film production value, and we'll get into that a little bit later about why that's kind of a problem. The time frame, it's the dark times that Obi-Wan refers to, 19 BBY, which is before Battle of Yavin, to 0, between episodes 3 and 4. And currently they do have confirmed that 50 hours of episodes plus a movie of the week has been scripted. So they've hired writers, and they actually have those scripts in hand. They've hired some production designers and some concept artists, so things are moving forward, probably not as quickly as some of us may like. No major film characters as of yet, supposedly. A darker tone, you know, including smugglers, bounty hunters, gangsters. And it is officially on hold due to budgetary concerns. We can talk about that. And Underworld is no longer the working title. We don't really know what it's going to be, and we can take some of your guys' suggestions later too. And this is kind of an interesting idea that they've been talking about. They're hoping to start off with one series and then create spin-off or multiple series that run parallel to it. So eventually, maybe after a couple of seasons, you're going to end up with 4 or 5 different series with different characters and different focus. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's ever really been done before, and it may not even be successful, but it's an interesting idea. And there have been talks with John Williams to do original scores for each individual episode. Now the fun part, the rumors. So who are we even going to see in the show? So Boba Fett showed up on the poster. So what are some of the other characters that we could see? Bail Organa has been listed. Mon Mothma, so we have the formulators of the rebellion. Bib Fortuna and Ula, which is kind of an interesting rumor that came out. Ferris Olin from some of the young reader novels. Mara Jade, which should be awesome. This is a time frame when she's the Emperor's hand, so she's not a Jedi, she is kind of a bad guy, so it'd be interesting to see that. Gregor Typho, which was he was in the movies. Galen Merrick from the Force Unleashed video games and multimedia series. That whole franchise kind of took place in this Dark Times period, so they could pull a lot of interesting stuff from that.
Hopefully they're not going to reiterate the games. We've seen those.
Yeah, we were talking, we don't think that they, or we hope that they don't just transfer the games or the novels or the comics into the show. Hopefully it'd be something more kind of like an ancillary thing, or they might just pull some characters in for maybe some cameos even. Quinlan Voss, definitely. He's been a fan favorite. He made his appearance on the Clone Wars television show recently, and a lot of the fans really liked that. And his whole backstory and his fate has kind of been left undetermined, so that could be interesting.
And back to the George Lucas quote, "There's no Jedi." That quote is, how old is that quote now?
It's old.
Yeah, it's like 6 years old. So we're listing some Jedi here. It could happen. Who knows? Things are going to change. Especially if they get desperate, they're going to throw a crap ton of Jedi at anything they can. So that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Thal Jobin, this was an interesting one that I haven't quite figured out how this one got started, but he was a character from the Droids animated TV show.
Hopefully without the hair.
Yeah. Actually, I think there was a bin actually out in the exhibit hall that had an unopened action figure with him, and I was tempted to get it and bring it in here. But, so clearly they're kind of culling the expanded universe, which is exciting. I think fans they've seen that that's been successful with the Clone Wars television show by pulling characters that have shown up in the EU and kind of making them canon by putting them into the TV show. So these two are kind of interesting. There's been some discussion around a rebel general with the last name Duran, and this has piqued a lot of people's interest because there's Kip Duran in the expanded universe who is a prominent Jedi. So this could be either a family member or maybe someone related. And then also a rebel named, the last name Naberi, which is Padme's last name. So that's interesting. We might pull some ties in there. Of course, Mandalorians, these have proven to be extremely successful on the Clone Wars, so it doesn't make any sense why they wouldn't include them here. And then, formerly Baron Papanoida apparently has been given a military title and possibly might become general and show up in the show. And then, based on that A.C. Crispin quote, there's a possibility that we might see a young Princess Leia. Some of the actors that have been rumored to be involved, obviously Daniel Logan, he showed up to a lot of cons. He was at Phoenix Comicon 2 years ago. He is going to be at Celebration 6 in Orlando this year. Go, it's going to be awesome. He played young Boba Fett, so there's been talks about pulling him back in for that role. He does the voice of young Boba Fett on the Clone Wars TV show, so it makes sense that his involvement would be highly likely. Jay Lagai, he played Typho, so if Typho's involved, he would probably be. Ian McDiarmid has said that he would be interested in reprising his role on the show. There hasn't really been any talks of whether he actually will be in it as the Emperor. It could just be voiceover work, it could be hologram, it could be stuff like on the HoloNet news that people see in the background, so that's obviously unconfirmed. And then Peter Mayhew has also said that he would like to be in it. And we'll talk a little bit later, but I think that having Chewbacca involved would be not too far of a stretch, so we might actually see him. And then of course Sam Witwer, who plays Galen Merrick in the Force Unleashed video games. He also has been involved with the Clone Wars TV show. He did the voice of Darth Maul. So clearly Lucasfilm... Sorry?
He was also the son in the...
Yes, that's right, in the Mortis trilogy. So clearly Lucasfilm has a relationship with him, so if they decide to go the Galen Merrick route, it makes sense for him to be involved. Plot points that have been discussed, Death Star plans. So anyone familiar with this part of the EU understands that it's one of the most convoluted things ever. There's different pieces of plans that have been scattered everywhere, and you find some in the video games, and they're discussed in the comic books and some of the novels. So it'd be interesting to see then what new thread that the live-action TV show could throw in here. There was a quote, someone asked Rick McCollum, so the age-old question, how does Leia remember Padme if she was died right after birth? And he said, and this was a quote from '06, so like I said, it's old, but he said, well, that's something that might be answered in the television show. So I'm not sure how he's going to answer that, because it seemed pretty definitive in episode 3, but who knows? We might see something like that.
He should have just said.
I know. We were talking earlier, and Rick McCollum doesn't really have an opinion on a lot of these things. He seems to be more like a mouthpiece for Lucasfilm and just kind of is a yes man, so you kind of have to take whatever he says with a grain of salt. Obviously, the Force Unleashed plot, it'd be cool to see some Juno Eclipse or something in there, some Secret Apprentice. Obviously, Bounty Hunters, it's going to be a big one. Pod racing has been confirmed, so it's going to be either actually seeing races themselves or seeing kind of like the political undertones there. So with gambling, fixed races maybe.
NASCAR for nerds.
Yeah. And this is one that Trevor has a lot to say about.
No.
This has been one of the only major rumors that's come out about the plot in recent months. Supposedly from a really good source, Ain't It Cool News, got it, but there was some leaked scripts, and one of them included a group of rebels who go back in time to the prequels and try to stop Darth Vader from being born. So, I don't know how I feel about that yet either. It needs to be handled carefully, I think. Take it away, Trevor, what do you think?
Well, Star Trek's done it to death, so why not Star Wars? No, it shouldn't happen, I don't think. Is anybody, what do you guys think?
No.
No.
Thank you.
We'll write that down.
Time traveling.
Was played by Arnold.
What's that?
It turns out they all have this massive hallucination.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll get high and think they're time traveling. You gotta mess time traveling somehow, I guess.
There's a comment back there.
There was that one book about the Sith ship that was trapped in time and it kind of came back in this era.
So there has been, time travel
That was
isn't,
time forward, not time backward.
right, it hasn't been completely divorced from the Star Wars universe. You have time fluctuations when it comes to hyperspace. There's different ships that have been caught in hyperspace, and that's kind of been wonky with time. And there's also been flow walking, but that is not to this extent. So it's interesting, and as I said, it's just a rumor, but it is out there, so. And then there's this, 1313. Lucasfilm actually just bought a bunch of domain names with Star Wars 1313 and different iterations thereof. So everyone's obviously curious as to what that means, what it stands for. Is it a new project? Is it their next franchise? Who knows? Rick McCollum in an interview was asked specifically about this, and he just stood up and walked out of the interview, didn't say anything. I mean, he did it as a joke, he was being funny, but he didn't say anything about it. So there's a possible tie they could have with this. People are speculating that it might be a clone ID number, but we really have no idea what this means yet. So what is the holdup? It is budget. So this is a quote from George Lucas, but the issue is that so far their proposed budgets for each individual episode is as much as a single Star Wars film. So And that kind of worries me, because that means that there's a lot of focus on the special effects and the technology. And in my mind, I would really, and Trevor, maybe you have an opinion here too, but I would really like to see kind of a return to original trilogy style, especially because this is the dark times, and I think it would give it a cool feel, and it would also kind of harken back to the original trilogy. So I want to see models, you know, I want to see puppets, I want to see some of that stuff that can be done really well with new technology. When you look at Lord of the Rings trilogy, and they used a ton of models, and it looks great. They didn't use nearly as much CGI as some of the prequel movies, and it turned out looking beautifully. So I think that there's some older film techniques that can be revamped with some really cool technology that's not going to be as expensive. However, I think we've all learned that George Lucas does lots of projects so that he can futz and mess with technology. So regardless of our opinions on that, he does a lot of really cool things by advancing film technology. So if he's able to make some of this really big, expensive stuff feasible and scalable for television, it would be a big deal. But currently that's the problem. So I don't know, that's when we don't know when we're gonna see it. I mean, as you saw, that poster said 2011. That's not the case. There's been rumors about next year, but it's pretty much indefinitely on hold. People are saying that we might not even see it go into production until 2015. So it's out there, and they seem pretty caught up in the Clone Wars TV show right now, so I think they have their plates full, but...
That's my concern, is if they're trying to trim down the budget and they go CGI heavy anyway, it's gonna look like that. It's gonna look like Clone Wars, and Clone Wars has some awesome writing. I'm not trying to dog on the show, but I cannot stand the animation. Like, and if you try to mix that with live action, I don't think it would work at all. I don't see how it would.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think if they just go more of the old trilogy route, it's going to give it a really cool look and feel, and it's going to make it feel like the dark times. You know, I feel like the prequels were nice and flashy because things were all nice, and the thing that made people resonated with the original trilogy is that dirty, gritty feel, and I think that's what this show would need.
Well, unless I'm mistaken, too, that's pretty much what we're looking for. I mean, do you guys think that they should kind of go back to the original format? I mean, yeah, they could update some of the techniques and stuff. You want, giant Rancor puppets running around. You know, ships, buildings, Death Stars. You could easily do that with novels. That would be fun.
I think so, and I think if they're trying to stay true to what they say about keeping it more about personal stories and keeping it more, quote, talky, as that first quote said, I mean, I think that you don't need to focus on the big epicness of the universe. We've seen that already in a lot of their different multimedia projects, so something like this and keeping it more personal, I think would be really great. So this gets into kind of the fun stuff where we get to just kind of speculate and kind of talk about what we'd like to see. And so this is where we eventually, once we get through kind of like what we want to see, we want to hear what you guys want to see, and we're going to take down some notes, and then we're going to throw that up into that Nerdvana post. And then so that way you guys can check it out, and if you have a certain character or a certain scene or a certain situation that you'd like to see in the show, we'll document all of that and write it up in a post. Maybe Lucasfilm will see it and listen.
And while we're talking, if you guys have anything you'd like to contribute, like say, oh God, no, that's a bad idea, feel free to stand up,
Yeah, Steph's our moderator, so she'll keep us all in control, but...
Yeah.
I would love to see Marjorie. That's my first one. I think she's been a fan favorite since Heir of the Empire was released. She is an awesome character, and I think this is a cool time frame for her. And we see the Allegiance and Choices of One novels, which have been out in recent years, which take place after this time period, but when she's still the Emperor's hand. And I think people have really enjoyed her character there. And I think it'd be great to finally put an actress's face to this character, so I think she would be a really cool addition to the show. I would also really like to see Shizor and the Black Sun. I mean, this fits so perfectly into the whole idea of the show, and we're talking about gangsters and the whole Underworld. Well, this Black Sun is the epitome of the Star Wars Underworld. And in the EU, kind of where we're at now, they eventually kind of peter out a little bit, but at this time, the Dark Times, this is kind of the height of their power. And it would be really great to see Shizor in this role, maybe even some of his interactions with Vader, because we all know that they don't get along. I think young Leia would be interesting. Even if we don't see her character maybe assigned to a particular actress, or maybe if we can just hear about her through Organa, or if we see maybe a mention of her in the Holo News. I mean, she's going to be the youngest senator in the Imperial Senate, so that's got to make some headlines. So I think seeing her somehow in the show, I think would be really interesting. And again, these are all rumors. These are things that we know kind of go fly in the face of what's been confirmed. You know, no major movie characters, but how I'd like to see a young Han Solo. The Han Solo trilogy by A.C. Crispin is a great read. It's really some great stories and a cool insight into Han's past. So I think it'd be cool to see him maybe as a street urchin on Corellia or something like that. Maybe even a young Lando. And what was he like before the mustache?
That's awesome.
And maybe even a young Dash Rendar. I think there's another Shadows of the Empire reference, but I think that he's a cool character that has only recently kind of gotten some EU love with Shadow Games novel, which came out. And he was a really cool character in that, and they've done a lot to develop him. So I think kind of going back and doing a young Dash Rendar would be really interesting. And of course, Chewbacca. I really think that there's room for him in this show. We've seen him work pretty seamlessly into the Clone Wars television show, and I think he has a lot of cool stories to tell, especially because I think we all kind of miss him a little bit, you know, us who follow the EU. He's been gone for a while, and it's kind of sad. So it would be nice to see him come back.
Have we even seen him rip off any arms yet?
You know
This
what?
would be the perfect opportunity.
It would be. I don't think we've actually seen it. We've heard about it and read about it.
People are afraid of it, so he's done
Some arm ripping needs to happen.
it. And just back to all those characters too, real quick before you go on. That would be their childhoods, their backgrounds. I think it'd be really cool to see how hands are recruited, because there was a ton of them, and we don't know anything about it yet.
Yeah, when the rumors came out that Ferris Olin and Mara Jade might show up, there was a lot of discussion about the Emperor's hands and some of the inner workings. There's lots of theories about it's going to be lots of spy storylines. So whereas the major films in the Clone Wars dealing with military and war, this obviously is going to deal with the gangsters and also lots of maybe some spy plot lines, and also kind of delving into some genres that aren't necessarily familiar with Star Wars. And we're seeing that in the EU novels with, like Death Troopers kind of going into the horror genre and Shadow Games going into the more mystery and noir style. So I think we're going to see a lot of genre bending in the show, which I think is really cool. Tarkin, he too has also made an appearance on the Clone Wars TV show, so I don't see why we wouldn't see him here. He's obviously a big player in the Imperial military, and we're probably going to see a shift politically if we get into any of those plot threads, moving from the Senate into the Moffs, into the governors, and then ultimately, when we see in Episode 4 when they just disband the Senate altogether. So he has a role to play, whether we see him or not, obviously will be determined. I would love to see Thrawn. We obviously have never seen him in person, but this is kind of his time frame too. I mean, the Emperor knows about him, obviously. Keeping him kind of hidden, but he has a lot of interesting plot threads, and Zahn's done a lot of really cool work with him, expanding his backstory with Outbound Flight, and I think he might even show up in the new Scoundrels novel, if I were to guess. But this is a cool time period to kind of delve into some Thrawn. Looking at the bounty hunters from this famous scene in Empire Strikes Back, I mean, we've gotten some of their backstories in like Tale of the Bounty Hunters. Obviously, some of the major ones have been more fleshed out than others, like Boba Fett and Bossk. But some of the other minor ones would be interesting. I mean, we kind of know about them. Dengar showing up in the Clone Wars, but it'd be cool to see them and see how they kind of get to become these famous bounty hunters that show up here. So clearly, they've had to have a pretty illustrious career up until now to show up in this scene. So it'd be cool to see maybe how they get there. I would like to see Ewan Merrick. I think Sam Witwer's a really great actor. He's done some cool stuff with Walking Dead and with Smallville and with Almost Human. And I think he'd be a good addition to the show. So even if it's not the major plot thread, which I would hope is not, I think his inclusion as the Secret Apprentice would be really cool. Bria Theron. Those not familiar, she is also from the Han Solo trilogy, and she was basically Han Solo's first girlfriend. and she ended up becoming a major player in the rebellion, and she played a decisive part in one of the stealing of the Death Star plans situations, the Battle of Tapwara. But she would be a good character to look at too, especially if we're going to be dealing with some of like the formation of the rebellion plot points. The Hutts, obviously, we just saw the EU novel Scourge, which just came out, which kind of dealt a lot with Hutts and Hutt society, and it seemed to go over pretty well with fans. And obviously, I mean, if we're talking about gangsters, I mean, so this is the first species that comes to mind. So getting into kind of seeing a lot of stuff in Hutt space would be cool. Some Nal Hutta and some Narshada would be cool. And Isay and Izard would be really cool. I love the X-Wing novels, and they're really popular with fans. And it would be cool also if Mike Stackpole could write a couple of episodes. He's been out of the EU since the Dark Tide duology, and it'd be great to have him back. But this is an interesting character too. She would obviously be kind of rising to power during this time frame, and her dad is involved also, so to kind of see her involvement in the Imperial military would be cool to see on the show. Clone and Boss, these are some of the ones that Trevor contributed.
And that was my comment, because they say no Jedi, but that's no quote. Also, there's a lot of Jedi out there that kind of slip through the cracks. So it's kind of going from, well, we got them all to, you know, I would like to see it at least once. I mean, I don't think they could do it too many times before it was kind of boring. But I'd like to see some stormtroopers go, oh, that guy, he's in the dead. You guys are familiar with the Iraq decks?
Yeah.
Do we tell anybody? No, we don't want to die. You can't stop them, and if you tell, you're going to get killed. So I'd like to see that scene with these type of ones.
I think seeing, and this was one that Trevor brought up that I hadn't really thought about, but I think it's a really a good idea, because her fate has also been left kind of open. I mean, she's kind of died a couple of times, and she's kind of come back a couple of times. We're not really sure where she's at. It's possible that they might tie up her storyline in the Clone Wars animated television show. We don't really know. However, if not, it would be interesting to see how she comes back. And this is one that our friend Christopher offered up, and I hadn't thought about either, but this one makes a lot of sense. Asherad Het, he's kind of been a character that's been all the way from the Old Republic, all the way up through the Legacy comics, when he becomes Darth Krayt. But he has kind of been a constant character throughout, and the Dark Time is kind of a time when we don't know a lot about him. You know, he returns to Tatooine to live with the Tusken Raiders, so that would be an interesting character to shed some light on and see live action. They brought back Darth Maul.
Yeah, that guy got cut in half, fell down the pit, and God knows what else. He lost a hand and fell a little bit. If they bring one back, they got to bring both.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. I mean, you never know. I think, I mean, how did you guys feel about bringing Darth Maul back?
Loved it.
I thought it was terrible.
I hated the spider legs. I thought that was fantastic.
So it sounds like it's a mixed bag, and I think that they did a really good job with the marketing campaign on that. I mean, it's pretty much genius that they tied it in with the re-release of episode 1 in 3D. So if they do something like that, I think it's going to take a lot of careful planning in bringing Mace Windu back. I think people did feel like he kind of went out like a bitch, which is too bad. So it would be nice to see him kind of get his kicks again. It'd be interesting, maybe a couple episodes dealing with, you know, Tusken Raider life. We see them a lot. We get a little bit of how their society works in the EU. But if we're going to be dealing with Asherad Het, and maybe some of those plot lines, we could see a lot more of them. Obi-Wan, I mean, he's going to be on Tatooine. He's kind of just becoming the hermit, keeping an eye on Luke. There's got to be some interesting storylines there. I believe the Dark Times, this era was when Obi-Wan had the fight with the mechanical Darth Maul. Is that right?
Yeah.
In the comics? Okay. So, I mean, again, we don't know what Darth Maul's plotline is going to be when it wraps up in the Clone Wars, if it does. That's always a possible thing. I mean, who knows? There could be assassins sent after that Obi-Wan has to save him from. There's a lot of cool stories that could be happening behind the scenes that we never got to see that this show would give us a chance to look into. And then with that, kind of Owen and Beru Lars. So we see them, you know, take Luke in that last frame of episode 3. What was it like? And if we see them, we're obviously going to be seeing a young Luke, which would be interesting. So.
I think you could have a lot of fun with those characters too, because you're taking Anakin Skywalker's kid. And I don't know, a lot of people think that maybe they don't know who Anakin became. I don't see how they couldn't know. And I'm pretty sure if I was Owen, I'd have a drinking problem. Because you don't know any day.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And if they're trying to go with a more darker, gritty, more human story, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting human stories that you can pull from some of this stuff. Like, you just adopted your crazy stepbrother's kid, who's now killing Jedi and overtook the galaxy. Like, that's, yeah, drinking problem might be the next step.
Well, so I think gambling should come up in that, even with those characters.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Let's see some Sabak tournaments. And lastly, I think we're going to see some R2 and 3PO. I mean, they've been in everything. They've been in all 6 movies. They've been in the Clone Wars. They have their own show, the droid TV show, which don't try to watch. I tried to rent them. It's terrible.
I was like 5 when I came out of those schools.
Yeah, but I think it'd be interesting to see where they are. I mean, they have kind of a checkered past as well, and it would be interesting to see, you know, who owns them. You know, after 3PO gets his memory wiped, you know, obviously he's in service to Antilles, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in between before he comes back to Antilles in episode 4. So there could be some fun adventures with the droids. As far as plot points are concerned, I would really like to see the quote "first victory" that's mentioned in the opening crawl of episode 4. There's been lots of speculation as to what exactly that's referring to. You know, was it the Battle of Tapwara? Was it, you know, some of the other 50 other mini skirmishes that happened in collecting the Death Star plans? But we don't really know officially yet what that quote "first major victory" was. So it would be really cool to see that and finally put some canon around that. And I want to see some new planets. I think one of the most exciting things about watching the Clone Wars show is seeing some of the planets that we've read about or heard about in passing come to life on the screen, even if it's in animated form. So seeing some of these planets in live action form would be awesome. Like, I'd love to see Ord Mantell, Nar Shaddaa, which we've seen in, like, you know, clips from some of the Jedi Knight video games. Alderaan, which we see briefly in episode 3, but we hear a lot about. And this would be a great chance to let Alderaan shine a little bit, because it doesn't last for a long. Corellia, I think, is one that's not given nearly enough screen time in anything. It's always talked about. Everyone seems to be from Corellia. All the whiskey seems to be from Corellia. All the ale seems to be Corellian ale. But we don't really hardly see much of the planet, and that's where Han's from. So if we're going to have a young Han Solo plot thread, it would be cool to see that. Bakra, I mean, it's staunchly Imperial, even after Return of the Jedi. So it would be interesting to see, you know, how it became that way. Clearly, it's very military focused. Kuwait, you know, all the shipyards, you know, seeing some of the Star Destroyers being built, maybe seeing, you know, the Executor being built. And then Kessel, obviously, if we're dealing with kind of the seedy underbelly, I mean, it's the prison planet, it's the spice mines.